Thank you, everyone. My name is Blessing Adeysian, and I'm the founder and CEO of MH WorkLife, where we are reimagining care for women, parents, caregivers, employees of all kinds in the workplace. And I am joined today by three wonderful career professionals, executives, business leaders, and so on and so forth, authors, and just really excited to introduce you all to them and talk about how we strive for a parent partnership, in our personal lives and even in our career. Even I feel like we need an element of partnership as well in the workplace, and parents are leaders. And so who better than parents, right, to lead that work-life integration that we continue to talk about in the workplace. I will kick this over to Eve Rodsky to introduce herself, and we're going to go around the room to Michael afterwards, and Sarah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I consider myself Blessing's friend first, and I love this community. Thank you, Sarah, for inviting me here. My name is Eve Rodsky. I wrote a New York Times bestseller called Fair Play. This is before the pandemic, when no one believed me that we were one crisis away from losing 30 to 40 years of women's labor force participation. That burnout crisis in my own life led me to develop a system for my own burnout that has worked really well, and it's become a movement. And so I'm really excited to share with you. And Blessing, I just realized Ben put his new artwork up on my wall. So I have a random American flag there, which is very strange for me. Patriotic in other ways, trying to change systems, but I just noticed.
You all, I mean, we just celebrated Memorial Day weekend. So
exactly.
I started and I was like, oh, wow, I didn't realize Eve was such a strong patriot, but I'm glad that Ben placed that in there.
Yeah, Ben placed it here for me.
Michael.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Wieder. I'm the co-founder of Lalo. We make baby and toddler products parents are proud to own for their home. I'm not as an author of such a powerful book as you, Eve, but if we want our kids to start learning the lessons early, I actually did author two books, the little book about love and a little book about trust, which seem like important lessons to learn if we want fair play in the home later in life. So maybe two lessons that we can start really, really early, but excited to be here.
Wow, thank you so much, Michael. Thanks for joining us. And Sarah?
Hi, I think most people know who I am, but I'm Sarah Dorsett, the CEO of Nanit, and I'm honored to be in this company with all three of you. And I think most people know what Nanit does, obviously, because this is the community. So I'll just share something personal. Tech is my jam. I cannot write. So I have the utmost respect for you for publishing and sharing, your stories and your creativity with the world. And I know it is definitely empowering and is driving change, which I'm incredibly passionate about. So that's sort of me, and I'm really excited to be here to talk about all things parenting and kind of relative to where we are in our own journeys from an entrepreneurial standpoint.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Well, thank you for creating this community. I think, I love community. I believe that as parents, we thrive on community. It's super important to how we live and how we work, and just having that outlet. I actually remember, speaking of, when Eve sort of, sounded the alarm, during the pandemic. I think one of the things that really got us through that pandemic, Eve, I don't know if you remember correctly, is like we actually had multiple Zoom calls on a daily basis, meeting with women, meeting with parents, meeting with business leaders. It was almost like forming a community on a daily basis, right? Like we would even jump from one Zoom call to another, right, Eve? And I look back and I think now, the community we have now, a lot of those communities actually started during that pandemic. It almost felt like a rapid fire community building session And I'm grateful for it. So thank you, Sarah, for putting this community together. Well, I want us to, first of all, I want to, some housekeeping. We have a signed copy of Fair Play, Unicorn Space, and deck of Fair Play cards that will be given to one attendee, as well as a $350 gift card from Lalo, Nanit Soothing Sleep Bundle, and 2 Nanit sleepwear items of your choice. So the winner will be contacted tomorrow by email, and we will also announce this on the Nanit Instagram page. So keep chatting with us in the comment section. Keep engaging, ask all the questions. We will randomly pick a winner today. So thank you for joining us today. All right, I want to level set very quickly, Eve and Michael and Sarah. 42% of mothers working for pay outside of the home have been diagnosed with anxiety and depression. 45% of American women in heterosexual marriages make the same amount of money as their husbands or more, and they spend 3.5 or 4.5 hours on household tasks per week than their spouse. 62% of moms say they have less than 1 hour to themselves each day. And sleep is one of the most common symptoms associated with, whether it's postpartum depression, anxiety, and so on and so forth. And so the more reason why we need spousal support. We also know that caregiving costs women nearly $300,000 in lost pay over their lifetimes. And women and girls handle 75% of the world's unpaid labor. So Eve, I think it's already very clear that the first question is coming to you based on those statistics. So first of all, tell us more about these statistics. What is surprising to you? And then afterward, tell us about the Fair Play system and what parents can do right now to help close this gap.
Well, I think it's such a great question. First, we have to understand that there is a gap in the fact that that was the statistic I was living, but I didn't even know at the time when I had my first son, Zach, 15 years ago, that women hold 2/3 or more of what it takes to run a home and family, regardless of whether they work outside of the home. That's been the statistic, same shit, different decade for years and years. And I wish I had just known that, to know that this is normalized, Blessing, right? That it wasn't a me problem. But I'll tell you just one quick story, and I talk about this in Fair Play. It's a story about women that looked like you, Blessing and Sarah. It was a time in my life where I was already feeling very burnt out. It was after my second son, Ben, was born. Something was going wrong in my marriage. I didn't have the words to articulate what was happening. This was in 2011. We didn't have even iPads back then. So definitely not a community like Mother Honestly or Nanit. We didn't have any products. Michael was probably not, he was probably a toddler back then or something, but it was a long time ago. Anyway, so it was a really lonely time, I think, for parenting, because attachment parenting had just come on the scene, which was basically like lay with your children for 3 years. That's what it sounded like to me. So it was hard. I felt very isolated and alone. And around the same time, I went on this breast cancer march for a friend who was diagnosed, back to, women and our health. And the women that look like you and Sarah, they're very powerful women in their own right, and they use their voices even more than I think I did in my own marriage. And what I noticed about these women was that it was a Saturday morning. We had this great day, and Blessing knows this story because it was such an important day for me, because it was one of my first acts of resistance in this movement, was to see these beautiful, strong women on a Saturday morning, covered in glitter and pink, celebrating our friend, and then watching them change into pumpkins, like the reverse of Cinderella once noon came. And I started to watch. Not everyone was married to a man, but a lot of us are. And we started to get texts, as Blessing knows, right? Texts that said things like, when are you coming home from the parade? Another one, where's Hudson's soccer bag? You want me to go to the birthday party, but did you leave me a gift? What's the address? My favorite text was my friend Kate's husband, and his text said, do the kids need to eat lunch? And so this was the phenomenon that was happening again in 2012. And what was interesting about this one particular day was not the overwhelm that I was watching of all these women. It was that every single one of them, Blessing, said to me that they left their partner with too much to do. And so guilt and shame and assumption because of gender, again, these are women who make the same amount of money as their partners, most of them. Assumption had these women to say, I need to leave immediately. And they left me there, Blessing and Sarah and Michael, to go find Hudson's soccer bag and to bring a perfectly wrapped gift to a birthday party and to feed their kids lunch. But that day I said, okay, if you want to leave and assumptions and expectations, again, I didn't use those words yet because I didn't have them because I hadn't written Fair Play yet or done my research. But I did say something, which I knew meant that there was a change coming in my life, which was I asked them to count up how many phone calls and texts we had received. We had 30 phone calls and 46 texts for 10 women over 30 minutes. So you ask me what's happening with women. Well, if you multiply that, compound it by the exponents that we're teaching our fourth grader right now, you realize that women are literally running up against the clock from the moment we wake up, and that was before the pandemic. And then you add in children to the dynamic when we're already unfair in most relationships, and then things go really, really wrong. And then I will say one more thing about those women. It kicked off Fair Play, which ultimately became a movement and system that we'll talk about. But the most important thing about those women, they were my first data cohort, those 9 women, and they ultimately became 200 women. There were 200 women in the initial cohort in 2012 that said that they worked for pay and that they also shouldered what became the Fair Play cards, 2/3 or more of what it takes to run a home and family. We have data on those women now, 10 years later, and every single one of those women, Blessing, all 200, are being treated for a stress-related illness. Every one. And insomnia was actually one of the top 5, so that's important because we're here with Nanit today. But also hair loss was number 2 after insomnia. Number 3 was SSRI use. Number 4 was thyroid, and number 5 was autoimmune. Number 6 was cancer diagnoses. And then there was a 10% or 11% of the women who weren't being treated by a doctor, but who said that they are self-medicating through early toddlerdom by taking edibles on the weekends, or doom scrolling, or mommy juice, which has become a cultural thing. So that's the context we're here. And this is not a doom and gloom. I promise we go dark to go light. Blessing and I do that all the time. But I think it's important because we're a community. And so none of this is your fault. And I think that's the most important thing, to understand that nothing that is going on in your life right now is your fault. But you do have the agency to breathe, even though the air is polluted. And I think that's the most important thing to understand. And we'll keep talking about the context. But I did want to set that context for our discussion today.
I'm just nodding yes and yes to everything you're saying. As you know, even within the MH community, we have literally uncovered women just being crushed, right, under the demands of the home. And I think what is even painful is that they're also being crushed in the workplace, right? Because now, you're being perceived as, undercommitted to your work, and you now want to compensate for that, right, by staying longer. I posted on LinkedIn, my very last ordeal in the workplace, where I had my breast milk spilled. I just had a baby and I went into the workplace, my breast milk spilled on the car, park and go ride, and there I was just wailing because I was trying to be the hero at work. I'm like, you know what? I don't really need to, stay back to finish up this pumping thing properly. I'm going to be right at the meeting. And so I had packaged the breast milk very haphazardly. And by the time I got to my car, it was just milk flying everywhere. And that was where, Eve, I realized that I was not mentally, I had a mental breakdown at the parking lot. So I had people folks in the car ride with me coming down and just, ma'am, it's okay, we're so sorry, and these are the issues, right? When women don't get the right support, whether it's at home or in the workplace, or in most cases, in both places, a lot of it just, we start bottling everything in, and it shows up in various ways, like what you described, Eve, whether it's insomnia or depression and so on and so forth. Eve, I'm going to come back to you, but I want to go to Michael real quick. Michael, I mean, I'm sure you are like just nodding your head and, wondering, what role, right, men have to play in all of this to really support and elevate care, in their homes, and really drive that equitable partnership so that women are able to get the support they need. They're also able to get a respite, right, that they need so they can recuperate, and renew themselves. So in your household, how have you been an active partner? And what roles and tasks, do you own? And what advice do you have for other dads to take a more active role in owning their own specific task? Maybe Eve can come in and, sort of help you out if you find
correct and give me tips. Yeah. So I'm definitely not a perfect role model. I think it's worth saying that. Just by trying, and it's certainly a tough balance, right? Being an entrepreneur, being a founder of a business, leading a company, and balancing kids is no easy task. But being a mom and a working mom is probably an even harder task. So I think the first thing is just a simple recognition of who the primary parent is really important. Because if you recognize it, I think it's a really good place to start. Like if you don't recognize that, and you don't recognize that where the burden is falling, it's hard to even understand where you can chime in. So that's number one. Number two, for in our house, my wife and I have something really working against us, which is we hate routine. So, so we have to force ourselves. So for me, it is small things. We have a dog. The dog is my responsibility. And yeah, there are times my wife walks the dog or does things, but like that's secondary to her. That's primary for me. And that doesn't mean my kids are not. But then the other things, like I do school drop off, right? That is a time I take also to be able to connect with my daughter and have time together. Bedtime has changed over time, but that's an area where create a really good routine. And it's just, I think showing up is not being oblivious. I think the stories that you shared, Eve, are it's such a bad reflection on men, that like how oblivious, like I don't know if there's another word, and like to understand that when you have kids, like when you're in a partnership, like the sum of it equals 100%, the tasks that need to get done. When you have kids, it equals like 1,000%, and no one has 1,000% to give. So the fact that burden, that extra 900% often ends up falling on the primary parent or the mom is obviously not fair. So finding and having conversation, I think is the best way, and being honest. So I don't know if we have perfect ways of divisions, but one thing we certainly are is very honest with one another when things are falling short. So I certainly know. I think my wife is pretty good at it, and certainly with the help of a therapist that she can have can debrief with, and find tools and words to be able to have productive conversation and things like that too.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I learned from Fair Play and Unicorn Space, Eve, was really carving out that time, right? Because it's very hard. I always say this already, it's too much work in the household, even for two people, right? Even when two people divide the work equally, it is still too much. So, I mean, now imagine, all of that load on one person. And so that is where, I really appreciated, Eve, your work with Fair Play, and really finding that time to check in with your partner, whether it's on a daily basis or a consistent basis. We do every other day because, quite frankly, we're not consistent with every day, but every other day, just checking in, on what is top of mind for everyone. What are the tasks that needs to be done? Who needs to be where and when? That has been really helpful to us. Eve, can you speak a little bit to that? One of my favorite line of yours, Eve, is really having that conversation when cognition is high and emotion is low. Because I know, sometimes I'm like, I want to have this conversation now. Like, you did not do the drop off, and now I have to do, I'm like just pouring it all down. And so tell us a little bit more about, having that, check-in time and how to go about that in a way that is not confrontational.
Well, I like what Michael said about the honesty. I think what's interesting about the home is that even my Aunt Marion's Mahjong group has more clearly defined expectations in the home. Like, you don't bring snack twice to her Mahjong group, you're out of the group. But the home, Blessing, is a complete shit show of decision fatigue, especially as Michael said, because people don't understand how powerful systems are in the home setting. They think they can just use the 3 most toxic words, which is the opposite of routine, which is we'll figure it out. You never figure it out. It just leads to resentment and hell. So unfortunately, you do have to plan. And I'm the same way as Michael. I'm spontaneous. Kids really cramp my style, but that's the choice I made, right? And so I have to raise them. And so they bring other things into my life, but I needed to recognize that. And we know that in the terms of the happiness scale, people report they're happier getting a root canal than they are actually being with their children. By people, I mean, Eve, me too. That is me. And so I think what's really interesting is that there's a secret formula, but it's a practice. And that's what's the hard part. The hard part is that people understand the exercises of practice, right? You're not going to go to your doctor and say, I worked out once in 2005, and so I'm here in 2023 telling you that I'm fit. But people will, Blessing, say, well, I tried fair play once, or I tried to talk about the division of labor and it didn't work 10 years ago, right? And so I'm never going to bring it up again. Or one woman, when I started to interview for Fair Play right after that breast cancer march, this is in 2012, and this is when I believe people, Blessing. Now I can predict their patterns. But when I believe people, I would actually take them at face value. And this one CEO said to me, she's a woman, we don't communicate about domestic life. That's what she said about her partner. It's too triggering. And then 20 minutes later, she tells me that every time her partner forgets to put the laundry in the dryer, she's been dumping it on his pillow. So then I crossed out, doesn't communicate about domestic life, and put in all caps, communicates about domestic life, right? So basically the truth is that the secret formula that Fair Play is based on is one of boundaries, systems, and communication. If you implement a practice of boundaries, systems, and communication, the people that were implementing that during the pandemic were reporting back to us that they were thriving during the most stressful time. And that was not just cisgender couples, it was LGBTQIA couples, it was actually single mothers who were asking for help and understood their boundaries. But that's the problem. It's a practice of all 3 of those things. The systems is what Fair Play is about. It's about dividing up labor, not leaning on assumption, understanding that there's ownership of 100 cards when you have children, and it doesn't have to be 50-50, but one person cannot hold all of the 100 cards. Even if you're a single parent, you have to bring in the community. But I think the hardest part is communication, because so many women said to me over 10 years that they don't believe that they've been conditioned to ask for what they need. Availability has become part of their identity. I would tell them to close their eyes, picture the school calling. And then they would tell me they're getting a stress response just by not picking up the phone when I pictured the school calling. So when availability becomes part of your identity, when guilt and shame takes over time, when you don't know how to ask for what you need, it's very hard to have boundaries in communication. And then the system is not going to work. And that's really, again, the context for the practice of what Fair Play. So what Michael was talking about, right? That understanding who the primary parent is, but that his partner's time is still valuable. He values that time, how to communicate with each other. And then I will say, Michael, it's time to implement some version of a system, but you're practicing the other 2 things, and that's all. It doesn't have to be all 3 things at once. just practicing those boundaries, recognizing your partner's time is valuable, systems, that Aunt Marion's Mahjong group shouldn't have more clearly defined expectations in your home, and communication, that checking in when emotion is low and cognition is high is one of the best things you could ever do for your relationship.
I do love that. The emotion low, cognition high.
That's it.
Yes.
And that means no feedback in the moment, guys out there. And that's the hardest thing. That's the number one communication vulnerability that people report to me over 10 years. They have to give feedback in the moment for some reason. Otherwise, they will forget. Somehow they don't have a notes app on their phone or a pen to write it down. You've got to give that feedback in the moment. And that is the most toxic thing that can happen in a home.
Do you subscribe to the thought that if it was not easy enough to remember, wasn't important enough to give the feedback? Is that a fair assumption?
Yes, sometimes that happens. Like one time in our check-in, as Blessing said, part of fair play is the idea of checking in when emotion is low, cognition is high. I looked at the list of things I want to talk to Seth about, and it's a true story. There was all caps. That means I was yelling at him and myself when I wrote it down. It said yellow rag. And when I got to our check-in, which was a couple days later, Michael, I literally, when I tell you not one idea of what yellow rag meant, I didn't know if it was an acronym. I didn't know if it was an actual rag on the floor. I really had no idea. So yeah, so I didn't bring it up because I had no idea. But I was all caps. So at the time, if I had talked about the yellow rag, it would have been a very big and traumatizing conversation. So I'm glad that rag stayed out.
And Eve, you left out because I don't have the fair play facility. I do think though that
you
Eve,
are a fair play.
I need to receive like an
You're
honorary
certified, of course,
on fair play. So but you left out like a wonderful secret formula as well, which is the CPE, right? And that is the one that was a real game changer for us. Because up until I read Fair Play, I would always just, I would conceptualize the whole thing, I would plan the whole thing, and I would just leave the execution to, my husband or somebody else. And I was still moving around, and a lot of people in the chat talked about being overwhelmed, right, with this mental overload of having to remember everything, having to be the one to, conceptualize everything and plan everything. And, oftentimes I think this happens, we see this with summer camps, right? Summer camp is a great example where you're the one looking for all the summer camp and researching and calling them, making sure they have robotics and they have soccer and they have, gymnastics, and you whittle it down to like 2 or 3, and you send in all the applications, the immunization records, all of these things. And all daddy has to do is just drop off, right? Like my husband helps to drop off. Well, you need all of this like full-time work that really is huge. So Eve, tell us more about this idea, because I feel like the CPE is a great opportunity for, this concept of striving for that true parent partnership, because we need to have a framework. And I think the CPE is a great framework to get us started.
Absolutely. Well, that is the system. So thank you, Blessing, for letting me go a little bit deeper and not take up too much time of other panelists for the core crux of the boundary systems communication formula. From all those who don't know me out there, but if you know that I'm a lawyer and a mediator by trade, you probably know that of boundary systems communication, which is the formula I use in the workplace for my clients who look like the HBO show Succession. You should all feel bad for me, but those are the clients I have. And in creating systems, Blessing, places for these families to thrive around complex decision-making, systems was the easiest place to start. So I thought I was going to be able to go in to divide a system for the home, just as I'd done for the workplace. It was a lot harder because I started with a spreadsheet called the Should I Do spreadsheet. It took me 9 months to create, finally sent it to Seth with no context, realized he had no idea what to do with this spreadsheet. That was 98 tabs and 2,000 items of invisible work called the Should I Do. So realized lists alone don't work. Women have been making lists for hundreds of years, but systems do. So when I had this 98 tabs Should I Do spreadsheet, the nerd in me, I'll explain, I needed to understand data, Blessing, of who was doing what, especially in hetero cisgender couples. Now, the hard part was men overreport by 2/3 what they do, and women underreport by 1/3. So what I was hearing was, who's in charge of groceries? We both are. Who's in charge of taking the kids to school? We both are. Who's in charge of school forums? We both are. And so I couldn't get an accurate assessment of really what was happening in families until I asked the most important question I've ever asked in 10 years, which was, how does mustard get in your refrigerator? Once I asked that question, and it came up just through interviews around, because condiments, I could ask it in 17 countries, because people like their condiments. I found out that something was happening all over. And that was women married to men were the ones noticing that their second son, Johnny, likes French's yellow mustard with their protein. So once I could understand that step in the workplace, we call that conception. We get paid big bucks for that. And so I'd start understanding women were doing a lot of the conception and noticing. And then they would tell me that they were the ones monitoring the mustard for when it ran low. And they were also getting stakeholder buy-in from their family for what they needed on the grocery list. Stakeholder buy-in is not exactly what they said, but that's what I was listening for. That's a big part of what we call planning. Again, we get paid big bucks for that. And especially if you're an entrepreneur, a lot of entrepreneurs understand this. Conception and planning of coming up with new ideas and planning those out is very important before you get to the execution stage. But then what I was hearing from men, and why Fair Play became a love letter to men, was that they were a hard time understanding their role. They were coming in at execution and they had no context. And so, Michael, you know, you're bringing home spicy Dijon every fucking time. And I asked you for French's yellow. So like, come on, Michael, like, I'm not going to trust you with my living will. Like, you can't even bring home the right type of mustard. So what I was actually hearing wasn't the mustard problem, Blessing. I was hearing the erosion of the two most important things any organization can ever have. And those are accountability and trust. And that's what Michael was talking about earlier in his books. Accountability and trust are the two most important things. They were eroding in homes. And so women were saying, in the time it takes me to tell him, her, they what to do, I should just do it myself. I have no trust that Michael's going to not bring home spicy Dijon. So what's the point? And so that's where men and the lack of psychological safety in men not knowing their role became really important to me, right? That it's not serving anybody, this breakup of conception and planning and execution. And that's become the core crux of Fair Play. It's not about 50-50. And so in my home, I was holding 88 of the 100 tabs. That's before they were cards. They were still Excel sheet tabs. That was not working for me anymore. We didn't have certain ones like pets, thank God. So there were certain tabs not in play. For other people, they were. For us, I had 88 of that 100. My husband had zero tasks where he was holding the full task. So in my house, we just started with 10 years ago, extracurricular sports. My kids were super little. They were going to start getting into, 2-year-old, top, whatever it's called. Zach, I think at that point was 3 or 5. Ben was 1. So it was, little league or whatever. And when I finally explained to Seth, I just want you to be on the 85-person text chain to coordinate the kids' practices and also get their equipment and then log on to the YSL portal that was created in 1985 and needs a birth certificate that I can't find. Like, you handle all that. I got 6 hours of my week back, Blessing. Over time, it's been way more than that because my kids are in competitive basketball right now. But it was just that one task of full ownership. And then Seth loved that task because it was something he valued already. And he understood the power of ownership because I didn't have to ask him 10,000 times if he had sunscreen or a water bottle. Like, he just did it all. And sometimes I showed up to games, sometimes I didn't. But that's the key. It's the conception, planning, execution. And once you own it, it could be just one card, but it changes the entire dynamic and how you look at tasks in your relationship.
Oop.
Oh, we lost you. You're on mute.
Oh, okay, perfect. Yeah, and I was just chatting. Obviously, you know how much I love the Fair Play system and of course CPE. And I have to tell you, of course, everybody, I think most people know that are my friends know that I live a cross-continental lifestyle. And whenever I travel, out of the country, I don't even call my husband. I may not call him for 2-3 days. And my friends are always like, what? I'm like, gee, like he knows what to do. Like I don't need to check in. Matter of fact, I don't like to. We actually have a rule when you're traveling. If we just do text messages, if we call it an emergency, like it is really.
That's right. I went from having no help to the place where I check in so infrequently when I go away. Then my daughter, my 6-year-old daughter, started telling everybody in her class last week that I was dead. So I got a lot of frantic text messages from mothers being like, are you on the road or are you dead? I was like, well, thank God.
Listen, I don't check in. I mean, I don't check in. I look in the camera, I see that the kids are fine. Because when I call them, they're crying. I'm like, no, like it's not worth it. So I usually don't check in. I just, exchange text with my husband and that's it. And we got there just by, this wonderful, concept of CPE, right? Where he doesn't like, he knows what to do. He knows where everything is, who he needs to call. He's on the school chain, which by the way, was the last thing that I did not do. The school somehow did not have my husband's phone number. And so my daughter, one day, I dropped her off at school and they noticed smallpox, which has been eradicated, was noticed. I said, really? You just know that this is smallpox? So they said, well, this is smallpox, so we're not going to let her mingle with the other kids. So they keep her in the nurse room or the sick bay for the whole day, because apparently they had been calling my phone and I didn't pick up. And that was because I think I was in a conference and I didn't have my phone on me. And so my daughter was there in this isolated room for 8 hours. And so I walked into the school. I said, you know what? You have my husband's phone number. It's right there on your file. I'm confused. Why didn't you call him? And they got it from me. And so now they actually don't call me anymore, which is great. They call my husband for every little lunchbox that they didn't open up the right way. They call him to come check up on it. So I think, and this is not to say, one of the things that we always talk about, and Micah, I'm going to come back to you because Eve mentioned something that was very powerful, which is in the amount of time that I have to explain what needs to get done, I might as well get it done. How often do you see that happening in your own personal life, or even with, because there's this idea that women should be asking for help, or that women should, always, like if you didn't ask for help, and so I didn't know you needed help, right? And so how do we get ahead of that? Because half of the time I don't want to ask for help, because in the amount of time that I am, that I ask for it, I might as well do it. So Michael, have you, how have you gotten ahead of that in your household, where you don't have to wait until your partner asks for help?
Oof, interesting. So first of all, I want to say I'm very glad that I got to be Eve's surrogate father figure in all her stories. So hopefully you replace my name with your own partner's name. Secondly, I think I realized as you were speaking, Eve, that I really sold myself short with the two examples that I've recognized a couple more things. Your mustard example brought up that I actually am in charge of figuring out if the mustard's running low and doing the grocery shopping.
Love it.
But,
and dog, pet is one of the hardest cards of all, Michael. So I'm very, very impressed.
Yeah, I'm bad at figuring out though if the poop bags have run out, and often she's good at remembering that.
That's groceries. So again, different.
Yeah. So to answer your question, Blessing, I don't know if we do get ahead of that often. Sometimes yes, sometimes no, and I think that if I'm understanding your question right, it's how do we get ahead of being told what to do?
Yes.
Is that or being
or waiting until your partner asks you for help before you actually?
I think it comes down to that obliviousness or the complacency, right? That probably a lot of men have. And so if you're complacent in in it, you probably do it more often. And I don't think anybody wants to be complacent with anything. I mean, it's like a weird word, right? So I think a recognition of that would make a man very like put on guard. And so I think that's one way. I think there is an understanding, even though we're not routine people, there is an understanding of the kind of tasks that we are like solely responsible for. And there is an ebb and flow to it. And I think it's a little bit of a personality trait, personality thing. And but it can be broken. It's not like some personality traits are forever. It's just like kind of who we are, right? And some I think are moldable and malleable. And this one, I think, for most men should be malleable. People that are actually interested in their partnership lasting, right? Because there's probably a deeper question if you're not interested in, if you're sitting in that complacency, is that, I think for anybody, whether that be man or woman or any partnership, it doesn't have to be a hetero partnership, is like, why are you complacent? And like you have to go back to the right, like, are you just so if you actually give a shit about your relationship, you will find those places. But I think it's in the moments that you are told, because it's inevitable that any man will, most men, there's always an outlier, most men will have this experience. They will be told what to do. But in that moment, if you could recognize that you were just told what to do, and then not be told the second time, and then think about the other ways this might apply in your life, you should be better off. But it's more, I think it's the awareness piece that I think so many men, I mean, I've been guilty of it myself, but hopefully that answers your question.
I think the biggest thing, like you said, is awareness and, catching yourself when you become complacent, right? So when it's, especially when you also notice, I think, Eve, let's come back to this one.
I do have one thing to add, actually, because I was speaking to something that stuck with me. I was speaking to an advisor of mine recently, and an older guy who's on his third marriage, so he knows what not to do. But he was telling me a story of someone else he advises, and something he was telling me in a sense of something that I think he kind of regrets, was like the undertone of it. And he said he has this one guy who he advises, that every day he wakes up and he thinks to himself, how can I make my wife happy today? And that's how he starts his day every day. And he actually writes it down and thinks about that every morning. And I thought that was like, I mean, he takes it to the extreme, right? Because he's not just thinking about it, but he's like acting on it, writing it down, and then putting it into action. But I was like, I mean, it was so extreme that it's like so like, I don't know, it really stuck with me. And so like, I don't do it every day, but oftentimes I find myself going back to that story when I'm in like a cycle of maybe not being the best partner, go back to that story and remember that.
I'm laughing so hard because Eve and I talk about this all the time. And, I think Eve mentioned it. I think it's a unicorn space. Like I said, I need a honorary degree, Eve. After this, just give me a certificate and we'll be even. But one of the things that, we always talk about is, treating our home as the most important organization. I mean, if you wake up every day and you write a list of your to-do list for work and all the things that you need to do to be successful at work, why not do the same thing for your home? Like, why is that? Like, it's so, that's a parallel. Like, okay, to-do lists, for my home and for my work. And it's one of the things that we've talked about, at MH, which is how do we, especially with the lines blurring between work and life, we can simply apply some of the principles that are working in the workplace in our home. Eve, I don't know what your thoughts are around that, and then we'll go into Q&A.
I think it's such a great question. I think it's very important to treat our homes as our most important organization. Blessing, as you know, that was a very important insight, because when I sent the should I do list to Seth, And again, it was the first time in my life, Blessing, I didn't feel alone because I had 9 months of sourcing. I started to ask women from the breast cancer march and 17 countries, what is it that you do for your partner that feels invisible? Because second shift, invisible work, a mental load, emotional labor, these are all terms that have been discussed for years. I thought I was done, Blessing, by having the should I do spreadsheet. I thought sending it to Seth after 9 months of work and enumerating the 2,000 items of invisible work that I was doing was going to change our relationship. And instead, when I finally sent it to Seth with no context, because again, I didn't have the boundary systems communication formula at the time, just can't wait to discuss. What I got back from him about an hour later was like a pixelated monkey emoji of its cover. I didn't even get the 3-monkey trio, just like the sad monkey covering its eyes. And so at that point, Seth's response was, well, I can't see this, nor do I want to, right? And so it was a very painful realization that sometimes the oppressed have to fix their own situation, right? That you can take agency in your own life. You can be a game changer, even if you're not the one who caused the problems, the perceived problems. And so the societal problem, that assumption of my gender meant that I was assumed to be a better multitasker, that I was the one who was assumed to, in the time it takes me to tell him what to do, I should just do it myself. The fact that it was assumed that my partner's time is diamonds and my time is sand, which happens in this country. Women's time is considered infinite like sand, and regard men's time as if it's finite like diamonds. If you don't believe me, just understand that every health system still says breastfeeding is free, even though it's 1,800 hours a year, it's a full-time job, right?
Absolutely.
Women enter male professions, salaries automatically come down. So we've been told since birth our time is worthless or worth less than men's time. And so then we become complicit in our own oppression. And so I'd say that's the biggest, hardest part, is knowing that I was complicit in my own oppression, because all these toxic time messages that I was a better multitasker, that somehow I was wired differently for care, that in the time it took me to tell Seth what to do, and I should do it myself, that I felt guilty for asking for what I need. I'm a Harvard trained attorney. I'm literally trained to ask for what I need. And in my own home, I lost my voice. And so one thing I want to say about Michael, about how important that intention is that we also, people who are complicit in their own oppression, also have to set our own intentions. And our own intentions are that we get to be also unavailable from our roles, that we get a permission to be unavailable, that we get a permission not to feel guilt and shame when we do things for ourselves. We get to be somebody other than Zach's mom. But to hold that boundary, we need our partners. And so I think, Michael, the only thing I would say that's different from what that man said is that he woke up every day saying, how can I make my wife happy? And I hate the word happy, because I really don't want his wife to be happy. What I want her to have is a true definition of mental health, which is what I want for you too, Michael, for any couple. And the true definition of mental health, which I talk about in my second book, is not how to be happy. It's, I wish he said in his mind, I'm focusing on how my wife can have the appropriate emotion at the appropriate time today and the ability and strength to weather it. Michael becomes part of the ability and strength to weather it. Because you can't have an appropriate emotion at the appropriate time and have ability and strength to weather it when you are feeling completely isolated, alone, and burnt out. And so that's one difference I would make, is that you want to say to yourself, how can I allow my wife or my partner to have the appropriate emotion at the appropriate time and the ability and strength to weather it? And part of being able to weather it is having systems, boundaries, and communication in place, tools, so that when these things come up, because men always enter care, whether it's on their third wife, or God forbid somebody gets sick in their family, men will enter care. We want you to do it proactively so that, again, it comes naturally as opposed to practicing.
Absolutely. I want to, I know we are, we're running very, very tight on time. I think we got carried away discussing really amazing things, by the way. Sarah, I want to come to you, as we talk about driving this parental partnerships, this balance, can you just give us a quick idea of the role of technology in all of this, and how technology has really helped improve this partnership at home?
I'll speak firsthand from my experience with Nanit, and I think our belief is that technology can actually benefit everything that was discussed today. So first, let me thank you guys for having this exchange, because I found it incredible. I've just loved sitting here, just listening to all of it and absorbing all of it and applying it to my own life. So first, I'll say that. I think what was really interesting about Nanit, and so most people probably know I'm not the founder of Nanit. This is my 5th year at Nanit, and I fell in love with the dads who created Nanit, because I thought I'd worked in technology my whole career, but on the consumer side, and I always thought that there was a place for technology was making life easier for everybody, but the most important job, which was our job at home. And it's hard to think about, I'm raising my kid, everything is so personal, everything is so touchy and physical and emotional, and technology doesn't fit in that world like that. You can't, technology doesn't do those emotional things for you. And I thought that too, but I thought there are a lot of things that technology can do to help ease your mind and make you just feel like you have a better handle on things. Most of the reason why we are, as parents, this has nothing to do with the fair play method, but as parents, most of the time, what really is behind a lot of what we do is fear of the unknown. We just don't know. We don't know the first time a situation comes up with our child that we've never seen before. And I would fall apart, completely fall apart. I had no idea. Does a fever this high mean I have to rush him to the doctor? What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And no one can tell you any of that. And technology can help you understand what's going on with your child if it's applied kind of the right way. And that's sort of how I saw Nanit coming in was, oh my gosh, you are going to be able to understand your child so much better. But what's been really interesting organically that I did not expect from my experience with Nanit was that one of the things people value so much here, and the thing that I now cherish, is I have seen how parents engage with Nanit, because you can be, as a father, you can be away from the house, or as a mother too, you're away from the house, you're working, or maybe one is at home and one is at work. Because both of you are connected and you're learning about your child at the same time, I have seen complete shifts in relationships. One of my favorite stories, well, I can tell you how many moms send me screenshots of dad checking in on the baby. Oh my gosh, the baby just went to bed. Oh my gosh, she's so cute. Oh, I love her so much. And mom at home is going, oh, he's thinking about me. This is so great. Look what Nanit's doing for it. And what they don't know, what they're sharing with me is that they're so excited that dad is part of this and dad is still engaged and dad is checking in. I had an epiphany. I went to dinner with one of my closest friends who had 2 small babies and a new husband. And I had sent them, every Nanit they wanted. So I think they have 4 or 5 at this point. And I go out to dinner with them for the first time. I'm meeting, her new husband who they just had all these babies with. And I'm sitting at dinner and she's talking to me, she's having drinks, she's enjoying life. It's awesome. Most of the time, I will tell you, when I am out with parents who have left their child with a sitter, I'm guilty of this too. It's mom who's like, I just want to check and make sure I'm just going to call. I'm just going to check in. This time I'm watching the husband open up Nanit almost every 10 minutes and saying, oh, look, they just went to bed. Oh my gosh. And I thought this entire dynamic has completely changed. She's having a great time. She's not worried at all because he's actually using technology and he's embracing it. And he's the one checking in. Like, this is something that he feels really, really good about. And that was kind of life-changing for me when I realized that there was this deeper connection, that technology could connect you, outside of the home, across continents even, and that partnership and that balance. I don't believe in balance. I shouldn't have said that word, but that idea that you could offset that mental load and those other things technology could actually help with that. And it can help in so many different ways. It can help when you have to transition back to work. And just understanding your baby's patterns can just make you feel a little bit better. Oh, I don't have to worry. I know what this looks like. I've seen this many times before. And one of the things that I try to encourage parents to do is just watch, keep an eye on that data. You're going to see some really interesting things. You're going to see repetition. Things happen and you can study exactly what happens after that. I've had amazing stories of how parents have said, you know what, I know when my kid is going to do X because this is how often I've seen their data change. And this is exactly what happens next. And so I don't have to worry. I don't have to wonder. what it is that's going on. And I think this can apply to the pediatric world as well, the science community, the research community. And I always thought that we would be able to get in front of a lot of those big question marks and all of that anxiety. And data and technology should be able to ultimately help us get there. The only thing that I don't love is that sometimes it is really hard for parents to embrace technology. But I always go back, my biggest, I had a parent the other day who was upset because we were using an app to submit expenses for our PTO. And I thought, and I understood she had a lot of expenses, she had a lot going on. And she also told me that she was the treasurer at one point and she did everything by hand. And I was trying to be very diplomatic about the whole thing. And yep, understand. But in the back of my head, I'm going, I bet that you post on Instagram. And in the time it takes you to take a picture, put it up, write a caption, put a couple hashtags in, and send it to all your friends, is exact same steps that you would apply to this technology. So if you think about kind of how you use technology today, it's very similar. A lot of things are built the same. There's nothing to be afraid of, but there's still kind of that hesitation around, oh, is it more work? is technology just going to add more work and not actually make it lessen it in any way or make life easier in any way? So I think there's still a little bit of work to do there, actually a lot of work to do when it comes to kind of the way that you can kind of understand data. But embracing technology is still hard for some people.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That's definitely, I mean, my husband, I've lost the password to all the cameras in the house. And just this evening, right before coming, I sent him a text. I said, make sure you look at the camera and make sure the kids are fine, because he's the one that even when I travel, when he travels, is like, can you go to the room and cover the little guy? I'm like, you're out of the country. Why? But I mean, if technology is how we get them to be more involved, I'm all for it. I'm all for it. We only have 1 minute, and I actually feel so bad because we have lots of great questions. Although I did read through the questions, and a lot of them, I think that we have done some justice to. Please feel free to reach out to Eve with any of your specific questions. Reach out to me if you have any for me as well. But I want Eve, this last minute, just tackle this question around getting over parental guilt when you take time for yourself.
Last minute, I'm going to say something important. 10 years ago, my son had like a mood meter. And we added guilt and shame to that because they didn't have guilt and shame for like 2-year-olds, but they had happiness, they had sadness. So I started to ask women 10 years ago using that mood meter, what emotions they were feeling around parenthood. Obviously, guilt and shame. This is also before Brene Brown was coming up a lot. One very important thing that I noticed though, and that has continued to happen. And this is not just for women, it's for men as well, and for non-binary individuals, for anybody who's in a caregiving role. We're used to, we can live in sadness, we can live in anger. Guilt and shame actually make us change our behaviors in the moment. And that's the thing that's most alarming to me about guilt and shame. One woman told me she had read my second book. She's a single mother. She decided to get sheet music and sign up for the Juilliard room in her building. It's a rent stabilized apartment and they have a music room for Juilliard students. She's not one, but she plays piano. She sat down the piano with her rent sheet music and started to practice. And then the sun started to set. This is in Manhattan. And then her heart started to pound, she told me, and said that her baby doesn't like being in daycare when it's dark out. And so she just left. She left the sheet music. She had booked the room and she just walked out to go pick up her toddler. That's what guilt and shame can do. It's very important to understand that we can have that emotion. We can have these emotions, but if we allow them and don't interrupt them and look at them as other emotions, but we look at them as behavior changers, they're going to make you make short-term decisions that are not helpful for you in the long run. And so that's what I'll say about guilt and shame. To change that dynamic, instead of try this for this next week, one homework assignment. Instead of saying, I feel guilty because I'm not putting Anna to bed tonight, I want you all to change it and say, I made the decision because. I made the decision, I'm making the decision not to put Anna to bed tonight because I want to see Blessing and we're going to go for a great dinner. I mean, that's not really happening. I wish it was. But start to make that reframe in your head and see what happens. Take that agency and interrupt guilt and shame.
Thank you so much, Eve. Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Sarah. I mean, I wish we had another hour to really just get into this discussion. I feel like I'm just getting warmed up. But thank you all, everyone, for joining us. Please continue to join the rest of our Parents Like a Pro events throughout the week and next week. We also have the recording. We'll be posting that out to everyone who registered for this event. We're super excited. The winner of the giveaway will also be contacted tomorrow. So keep an eye for that in your email and on our social media at Get Nanit. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Nanit, for having us.
Thank you, everybody.
very much. It's amazing.